Sign the papers or I will make sure everyone in this county knows what you really are." My mother-in-law did not knock. She walked into my kitchen at 7 in the morning with a manila folder pressed to her chest and my husband standing 2 steps behind her like a shadow that had finally grown its own spine. I was still holding my coffee. The steam was rising between us. I set the mug down slowly and looked at the two of them standing in the home I had purchased before my husband and I ever said our vows, and I understood with complete clarity that this moment was not a surprise. I had been calculating the probability of it for almost 2 years. My name is Claire. I am 32 years old. I work as a forensic auditor for a firm that investigates financial fraud in corporate mergers and acquisitions. What that means, practically speaking, is that I get paid very well to find the money that people are trying to make disappear. I follow the paper trail that someone thought they buried deep enough. I read the fine print that no one believes anyone will ever actually read. And I find the thing that was never supposed to be found. I had spent the last 19 months doing that exact job on my own marriage. But to understand why I did not throw them out that morning, you have to understand how I got there. You have to understand my husband's family the way I eventually came to understand them. Not as people, but as a system. A very deliberate, very patient system. I met my husband at a conference 4 years ago. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming when they want something from you but have not yet decided what it is. He was handsome. He laughed at the right moments. He asked questions that made me feel like the most interesting person in the room. I told myself I was too careful to fall for surface-level performance. I was wrong. I was 38 days into our relationship before I met his mother for the first time. She arrived with a casserole and a list of questions disguised as conversation. How much did I make? Did I own my condo or rent? Was my family money old or new? She asked every question with a warm smile and her head tilted slightly to the right, like a woman at church pretending to listen to the sermon while actually counting the collection plate. I noticed it. I filed it away and told myself I was being uncharitable. By the time my husband proposed, I had learned to work around her. I told myself that was normal, that managing a difficult mother-in-law was just part of the package. I told myself that right up until the morning I found the second phone. It was 14 months into our marriage. I was looking for his car insurance card in the junk drawer, the one we had agreed to share for household documents, and my hand closed around a phone I had never seen before. It was older, a prepaid model, the kind you buy with cash. There were 142 text messages from a contact saved only as M. I did not read them all. I read enough. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I went to work. I sat at my desk, and for approximately 90 seconds, I let myself feel the thing I was feeling. Then I opened a new spreadsheet and started a different kind of audit. Over the next 7 months, while my husband came home for dinner and complained about his commute and watched television on our couch, I built a file. I tracked the cash withdrawals from our joint account. $1,100 here, $1,400 there, always just under the reporting threshold, always on weekdays when he knew I worked late. I pulled the property records in neighboring counties. I found a lease agreement signed 4 months before our wedding, an apartment in a building 22 minutes from our house, paid monthly in cash. I found the furniture purchases, the restaurant charges in neighborhoods we had never been to together. I documented every single one. I also found what he had done with my inheritance. My grandmother passed away 3 years before I met my husband. She left me a trust, not a dramatic amount, but enough. $340,000, designated specifically for real estate or education. When my husband and I began talking seriously about the future, I told him about the trust. I told him I intended to use it as a down payment on a larger house when we were ready. He had nodded thoughtfully and asked several detailed questions about how the trust was structured and who the trustee was. I had answered all of them. 11 months into our marriage, he had approached my trustee directly, presented a forged letter of authorization, bearing what looked like my signature, and withdrawn $210,000, citing a joint investment opportunity. The trustee, an old family friend who was by then in his late 70s and had never dealt with anything like it, had processed the transfer without calling me first. The money went into an LLC my husband had registered in his mother's name in a state neither of them lived in. When I found this, I sat very still for a long time. Then I called a lawyer, not a general practice attorney, a specific attorney who specialized in marital asset fraud and forensic financial litigation. Her name was Diana. She was 51 years old. She had 22 years of experience. Her voicemail message said she was unavailable but would return calls within 1 business day. She called me back in 4 hours. We met every 3 weeks for the following 6 months. By the time my mother-in-law walked into my kitchen that morning with her folder and her ultimatum, I had a binder in a fireproof safe in my office that was 160 pages long. I looked at my husband across the kitchen island. He was not meeting my eyes. He was doing the thing he always did when his mother was running the scene, making himself useful by being invisible. She slid the manila folder across the counter toward me. She told me she knew how hard marriage could be. She said that her son was struggling and that sometimes people grew apart and that the kindest thing 2 adults could do was to make a clean break without the ugliness of attorneys getting involved. She said the papers inside were a mutual dissolution agreement, 50-50 on the joint account. He would take the car. I would keep the condo, the one I had purchased before we married, the one that was already in my name alone. She called it generous. She pushed the folder another inch toward me. I did not open it. I already knew what it said because Diana had told me what to expect. The agreement was designed to look balanced while quietly omitting any mention of the trust, the LLC, or the $210,000 that had been taken from it. If I signed, I would be releasing all financial claims against my husband, his assets, and by extension, any entity in which he held interest. It was not a divorce agreement. It was a liability waiver dressed in the language of mutual respect. I looked at my husband, and I asked him one question. I asked him if he wanted to do this in front of his mother, or if he preferred to have a conversation alone first. His mother answered for him. She said there was nothing to discuss. She said I should take the offer before things became unpleasant. I nodded. I told her I needed 48 hours to have my own attorney review the documents before I could sign anything. That was legally my right, and they could not argue with it without making the conversation very uncomfortable. She smiled, tight and controlled, and said of course. They left. My husband did not look back. I called Diana from the driveway before their car turned off my street. 2 weeks later, I walked into the offices of Green & Associates on a Tuesday morning wearing the gray blazer I kept for depositions. The conference room they put us in had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river. My husband and his mother arrived with their attorney, a man I recognized from his firm's website. Expensive, well-connected, the kind of lawyer you hire when you are confident the other side cannot match you. He had a leather portfolio and a practiced expression of mild boredom. He did not stand when I entered the room. Diana sat to my right. Between us on the table was a single black binder, closed. Their attorney opened with a summary of the dissolution agreement as though he were reading a menu. Joint account divided equally. Personal property returned to original owner. No additional claims. He slid a signature page across the table. He said my husband was prepared to be reasonable, and that they hoped I felt the same way. Diana said we had a few items to address before we discussed signatures. Their attorney smiled the way experienced attorneys smile when they believe the other side is about to waste everyone's time. He said please, by all means. He gestured at the room like he was giving us permission to use it. Diana opened the binder. She turned it to face the table. The first page was a timeline. Clean, precise, color-coded by account. It covered 22 months of financial activity, beginning 4 months before our wedding. Every cash withdrawal was marked. Every transfer was annotated with destination. At the bottom of the page, there was a total. It read $263,400. I watched my mother-in-law's expression. She was good. She barely moved. Her eyes flicked once to her son, and then returned to neutral. He had gone pale. Diana explained that the total represented the aggregate of undisclosed financial transfers made from joint and jointly accessible accounts during the marriage. She said that this included but was not limited to the unauthorized withdrawal from my private trust, which had been executed using a document bearing a forged signature. She placed the forged letter of authorization on the table beside the timeline. She placed beside it a handwriting analysis report from a certified forensic document examiner, confirming the signature was not mine. Their attorney had stopped looking bored. My husband's mother said that was an outrageous accusation. She said the investment opportunity had been fully discussed, and that I had approved it verbally. She looked at me when she said it, holding my gaze, daring me to contradict her directly. I let Diana answer. Diana explained that verbal authorization was not sufficient to override the written terms of a trust instrument, that the trustee had been contacted and had provided a full account of the interaction, and that the trustee's statement had been included as Exhibit 4 in the binder. She also mentioned, gently, that inducing a trustee to release funds through misrepresentation was a matter the state bar of this jurisdiction took quite seriously, given that the trustee in question was a licensed fiduciary. Their attorney leaned over and said something quietly to my husband. My husband said something back. His mother placed her hand on his arm. Diana turned to the next section. The second section covered the LLC. She had the registration documents. She had the operating agreement. She had the bank statements showing the initial capitalization, $210,000, deposited in a single transfer 9 days after it left my trust account. She had the property records showing that the LLC had subsequently purchased a parcel of undeveloped land in a county 3 hours north of us. She had the current assessed value of that parcel, which had appreciated considerably. My mother-in-law said her name was on the LLC because she had invested her own money and that her son was simply listed as a co-manager. She said it calmly, like a woman who had rehearsed for this exact question, like a woman who had been told by her own attorney that this was the line to hold. Diana smiled pleasantly and turned to the third section. The third section was a lease agreement. It was for the apartment in the building 22 minutes from our house. The lease was in my husband's name. The utilities were in my husband's name. Diana had included 12 months of credit card statements showing charges at restaurants, hotels, and a jeweler in the city, none of which corresponded to any trip or occasion I had been part of. She had also included a printout of digital records I had obtained through proper legal channels, showing that the prepaid phone I had found in the junk drawer had been purchased at a specific electronics retailer, paid for in cash, on a specific date, by a person whose physical description matched my husband's. She did not editorialize. She simply placed the documents on the table in chronological order. The room was quiet except for the sound of the river traffic outside. I had not said a single word since we sat down. Their attorney asked for a recess. Diana said, of course. She closed the binder and folded her hands on top of it. While the three of them left the room, I poured a glass of water from the pitcher on the table and looked at the view and thought about something my grandmother used to say. She used to say that the hardest part of being patient was that everyone around you mistook it for passivity. She was a very practical woman. I missed her. They came back 18 minutes later. Their attorney had a different quality of composure when he sat down. The practiced boredom was gone. He said his clients were open to a more comprehensive discussion and asked what we were proposing. Diana opened a second folder that she had kept in her bag. She laid the document on the table. I want to be clear about something. I did not write this agreement to punish anyone, at least not in the way that might look satisfying from the outside. I wrote it because I am a forensic auditor, and the way I was trained to think about value is in terms of what something is actually worth, not what someone says it is worth, and not what it would cost to fight over in court for 3 years, while the real value evaporates in legal fees and delays. I am not sentimental about numbers, but I am precise. The agreement required full repayment of the $210,000 withdrawn from my trust, with interest calculated at the federal statutory rate from the date of transfer. It required the transfer of the LLC's interest in the land parcel to a holding entity in my name, as the land had been purchased with my funds. It required my husband to vacate my property within 30 days, and to remove his name from any account, utility, or subscription associated with my address. It included a confidentiality clause protecting both parties from public disclosure of the financial matters, which I included specifically because I knew his mother would find it unbearable to imagine anyone finding out. And it included a clause stating that in exchange for their compliance, I would not be pursuing criminal referrals for forgery, fiduciary fraud, or wire fraud, all of which Diana had confirmed were viable. Their attorney read it. He read it again. He asked one question, which was whether the forgery referral was something we were genuinely prepared to pursue, or whether it was a negotiating position. Diana told him we had already prepared the filing. She told him we were prepared to hold it for 60 days pending compliance with the agreement, and that if compliance was not achieved within that window, the filing would proceed without further discussion. My mother-in-law said my name. She said it with a particular intonation, the one she used when she was attempting to appear wounded rather than calculating. She said she hoped I understood that this would affect more than just the two of us. She said family was complicated and that sometimes people made mistakes and that she hoped I had enough grace to leave room for that. I looked at her. She was a composed woman in an expensive blouse sitting across a mahogany table from the daughter-in-law she had walked into the kitchen of that morning expecting to hand a document to and walk away from. I thought about the casserole she had brought 4 years ago and the questions she had asked while the dish was still warm. I thought about the way she had looked at me that first evening. Not at my face, but at the inventory of me. I thought about what it cost me to be the patient one, the quiet one, the one who filed things away instead of reacting. I told her I did have grace. I told her that was exactly why we were in a private mediation room with a confidentiality clause instead of in open court with a court reporter and a public record. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked away. My husband signed first. He did not look at me. His hand moved across the signature line quickly, like a man removing a bandage. His mother signed second, with the careful deliberateness of someone who has just understood that the ground shifted and they did not notice until after the fall. Their attorney signed as witness and initialed each page with the efficient detachment of a professional who has learned not to let outcomes affect him. I signed last. Diana countersigned. We made 2 certified copies. The original went into Diana's case. I took 1 copy and put it in my bag. Their attorney stood immediately. He said something professionally neutral about hoping for a smooth transition. My husband stood without looking up. His mother gathered her things slowly, the way people do when they are trying to decide if there is anything left to say. At the door, she paused. She turned back toward the table, and for a moment she looked genuinely confused, like a woman replaying a film that had not ended the way she had expected. She asked me how long I had known. I told her I had started documenting 14 months into the marriage. I told her I had been doing it professionally since I was 26, and that I had spent the better part of my career finding exactly what she and her son thought they had hidden well enough. She left without responding. Diana and I stayed in the conference room for another 20 minutes finishing the paperwork. She asked me how I was doing, not in the professional sense, in the human sense. I told her I was fine, which was not completely true and not completely false. I was something more specific than fine. I was clear, the kind of clear that comes not from anything resolving easily, but from spending a very long time carrying something heavy and finally being allowed to set it down. I drove home along the river. The land parcel transferred within 40 days. The trust repayment came through at 43. My husband vacated my property on day 27, taking the furniture he had brought and leaving behind 2 years of accumulated habits and a drawer full of takeout menus neither of us would ever use. I sold the land parcel 6 months later. The market had moved. The profit, added to the repayment, came to more than I had lost, and enough to cover Diana's fees twice over, with a margin left for the renovation I had been putting off since I bought the condo. I refinished the floors and replaced the windows that had always let in drafts and put up a bookshelf in the space where his television had been. I do not think about them often now. When I do, it is not with the anger I might have expected. It is with something closer to the feeling I get when I close an audit on a complicated account. The quiet satisfaction of a number that finally balances. I spent a long time thinking that patience meant waiting for other people to do better. I have since come to understand that patience is something you practice for yourself. You build the file. You document the facts. You wait for the right room. And then you walk in and you open the binder. I am alone in a way I had not been in 4 years. Some nights that is simply what it is. But I wake up every morning in a house where every document is in my name and every number adds up and nothing has been taken from anything I did not agree to give. There is a particular freedom in that, smaller than it sounds in the telling and larger than I expected in the living of it. If you have ever had to become the most dangerous version of yourself, simply to protect what was already yours, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. I want to know how far this reaches.